second hour had a longer time period today, so we got a lot to cover. But I'm going to start with this video. Last thing I talked about yesterday was appeasement. And the example we talked about was when Hitler rearmed the Rhineland, European powers chose not to enforce the Treaty of Versailles, which could be construed as a form of appeasement. Okay, themes for today really be focusing around these three things: the isolationism in the United States, the official neutrality acts that the United States will pass, trying to keep us not from taking sides. Okay, and more appeasement as well. This video here is thought-provoking. He talks about the history, but also talks about today and how we deal with nations like China and Iran, who are, possible enemies of the United States. So this is pretty good foreign policy discussion. And go.
Force of arms if necessary. But how do you know when a resort to war is justified? I'm Jim Lindsay, and this is Lessons Learned. Our topic today is Adolf Hitler's announcement on March 16, 1935, that he was rearming Germany. Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. Within a week, he told German military leaders that his ultimate foreign policy goal was to conquer lands to Germany's east and to seek their ruthless Germanization. One thing, however, stood in Hitler's way: Germany's military weakness. The victors of the First World War had written the Treaty of Versailles to keep Germany from threatening the rest of Europe ever again. Among other things, Germany could have no more than 100,000 troops. The size of its navy was limited, and the treaty barred Germany from having an air force. None of that mattered to Hitler. Soon after consolidating his power at home, he moved to rebuild the German military. He ordered the creation of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. He also launched plans to create an army 3 times larger than what the Versailles Treaty allowed. Initially, however, Hitler kept these decisions secret. In public, he proclaimed Germany's peaceful intentions and its commitment to honor its international obligations. All that changed on March 16, 1935. Hitler announced that Germany was reintroducing a military draft with the goal of creating an army of more than 500,000 soldiers. He also confirmed what had long been rumored, that the Luftwaffe had 800 planes. Hitler made his announcement based on a simple calculation, that the other European powers would grumble, but they wouldn't go to war to preserve the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. He was right. Britain, France, Italy, and the League of Nations all condemned Germany's rearmament, but they did nothing to make Hitler pay a price. This tepid reaction only emboldened Hitler. A year later, he violated another provision of the Treaty of Versailles and remilitarized the Rhineland. In September 1938, he demanded and got the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. It was only on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, that the rest of Europe confronted rather than appeased Hitler. What's the lesson of Hitler's decision to rearm Germany? Just this: aggressive expansionist states are most easily stopped early on when they are weak and vulnerable. But precisely because their capabilities are limited at that point and their intentions can only be guessed at, it is often hard to persuade other countries to act. Governments calculate that it is wiser to accommodate than to confront. The lesson of Germany's rearmament lies at the heart of debates today about what to do about Iran's nuclear program and the emergence of China. Proponents of a military strike against Iran worry that it seeks to remake the Middle East. In contrast, skeptics doubt Iran's ability or interest in being a revisionist power, even if it becomes a nuclear one. In the case of China, proponents of taking a hard line with Beijing worry that a combination only emboldens Chinese officials to act more aggressively. In contrast, proponents of diplomacy counter that accommodating China's interests is the only way to persuade Beijing to accept rather than to challenge the existing world order. Figuring out what to do about Iran or China would be easy if we knew how to measure intent. That is, if we knew what Iranian and Chinese leaders were really seeking to do. But intent is only something we can guess at. So here is a question to consider. What are the signs of a country that can only be confronted and not accommodated? I encourage you to weigh in with your answer on my blog, The Water's Edge. You can find it at cfr.org. I'm Jim Lindsay.
Okay, quite a bit to unpack there. When we talk about Germany, okay, and guys, talking about intent, did we know what Hitler's intent was? Did the British know? Did the French know what his intent was? Well, as I told you guys, if you read Mein Kampf, it's in there, what he plans to do. Okay, so why did they not act? Why did the French and the British not act when he was weak and they could have stopped him? They didn't want to go to war. They were scared of war. Yeah. Yeah, it's like giving up your principles in order to avoid conflict. So what we see here, guys, is different in the modern era with China or Iran, for instance. Or can we measure Iran's intent? Okay, so when they chant in the streets of Iran, "Death to America," or their leaders say their goal is to wipe Israel off the map, there's one weapon we know that can wipe a country off a map, especially a small country, and those are nuclear weapons. Okay, now, Iran is pursuing nuclear technology, okay, or at least atomic technology, okay? And guys, if we go back to the 1980s, when Iraq, under Saddam, started to build this technology, Israel, using American-made dive bombers, fighter bombers, went in and blew up Iraq's facilities so that to set them back 10 years. Now, Israel may act in its own defense again on Iran. Israel is our ally, which could draw us into a conflict with Iran, or the United States could choose to take out Iran's nuclear facilities on our own and set them back 10, 15 years. Now, Iran learned the lesson of Iraq, and so they started building all their facilities underground, under concrete, in bunkers. Okay, so we have a general idea of where these are just by watching satellite photos. When you dig a big hole in the ground, that displaces a lot of dirt, and you've got to use trucks to move that dirt, right? So we have a pretty good idea where Iran's nuclear facilities are. Can we take out their facilities if they're underground, under concrete? Do we have that technology? Yeah. So my wife went to Virginia Tech and studied chemical engineering. She had 3 roommates. They were all valedictorians of their high schools. My wife was not. She was the lone non-valedictorian. And she's still friends with these gals, and I've got to meet them and their husbands a couple of times, who they met at Virginia Tech. And one of them is a guy named George, and George works for the United States Navy. And he actually helps design what are called bunker buster missiles, which penetrate the concrete and then explode. Okay, so this is what he does. He tests this stuff for a living. Okay, it's kind of a cool job. Okay, and then one of the other guys is actually working on the railgun. Okay, which is really cool technology. If you haven't heard of that, it's being able to fire bullets without gunpowder. It's pretty amazing stuff. So guys, when we talk about Iran, do they have a game plan? Do we know what it is, what their intent is? See, the problem with Iran getting nuclear weapons is this. If Iran gets them, then Saudi Arabia is going to want them. Saudi Arabia gets them, then Syria is going to want to get them. And we know there's nobody crazy enough over there to actually use one of these weapons, right? Right. I mean, we got nothing to worry about there. So it's not so much, I mean, it is kind of, we don't want Iran to get them because you get nuclear proliferation from there. So like when Pakistan got them, India got them. You understand? Because they are rivals. Okay. So that's what you're going to be seeing is proliferation of nuclear weapons into the Middle East, which could threaten Europe. Now, these weapons, guys, are harmless unless you have a delivery system. Okay, so we talk about North Korea getting nuclear weapons or atomic weapons, and do they have a delivery system to hit the United States? We don't really know, but you build rockets in stages, okay? And so as they add stages to those rockets, they can reach Alaska. This is why we have the most highly advanced radar in the world in Alaska right now. So we can see any type of launch from North Korea, okay? We have about a 60% success rate with shooting down a missile with a missile. It's a pretty good success rate, but if you're talking about nuclear weapons, a 40% chance of them getting through is not good.
Oh, we can just fire shoot missiles.
Multiple, yes. Now, that's good for North Korea, but you know what China has when you say fire more than one. They have what's called multiple warhead delivery systems. So they can send one missile and fire multiple warheads from that one missile, which makes them very hard to shoot down. Yes.
What happens when a missile hits a nuclear missile?
So, so it depends on whether you're talking about fission or fusion. Okay, so guys, nuclear weapons have to be activated. So you're talking about either colliding atoms or splitting them. So if you blow, like say one falls from the sky, it's not going to create a nuclear explosion. You know what I mean? Or if you blow it up, it's not going to create a nuclear explosion. Now you might get, if it's uranium, you might get some radioactive, you know, fallout from that, but you're not going to get a nuclear explosion. If that makes sense.
I'll trust you on that one. It doesn't, but that's good.
No, like seriously, I mean, you have to trigger the reaction, and an explosion won't do that. Yeah, I would assume in most.
Okay, let's break down the they keep splitting more and more.
Okay, so-
It's big.
Uranium, you were talking like a lot.
Uranium?
I still need.
Uranium does not go off at heat. That's why it won't blow up.
Cool.
Guys, fusion bombs are so extremely complicated. I'm not a nuclear scientist, but I've had one in my classroom. And yeah, I had a former student whose dad was a nuclear scientist, worked for the government. Actually, his job during the 80s and 90s was dismantling nuclear weapons for the government and for Russia for that matter. So anyhow, we'll get into more of that later when we get into the atomic age, okay? But, so anyhow, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with China? How do we deal with Iran? If you can't measure intent, do we really know what the Chinese leaders want to do? And if you look around the world, guys, you talk about the existing world order today, okay? The United States has friends all over the world. The main reason why we do, one, because we support democratic movements, we support freedom, justice, and so forth. But the other is we buy that friendship. You understand? China is increasingly moving into Africa, into Central America, South America, exuding their influence in these places, like we did many years ago. Okay? So what you may see, what is the 21st century going to look like? We're in 2021. What's the world going to look like in 2080? Will the world order change in favor of the Chinese? So what you're saying that if you could have a communist nation become the most powerful nation in the world, what does that mean for the rest of the world? So what are you going to do about it?
How do we know how well they're doing right now?
China?
How do we know that they're not like
making of how good they are. Because we know that no other communist nation ever has done that before.
Well, see, that's the thing about China. They call themselves communists. They're not communists. You know what I mean? Like it's easier to open a business in China than it is in California because of all the business regulation and so forth in California. All the bureaucracy, all the red tape, all the environmental issues in California, their laws are tougher. And so in China, they understand communism as an economic system does not work. The Soviets proved that. Okay? So the Vietnamese, I mean, if you talk to Vietnamese, they call themselves communists, but their economic system is not communist. Now, the government exerts control, but if you know the right people, pay the right people off, you can get what you want, okay? And you can run your own business, okay? And so they know it doesn't work. Yeah.
So China is spreading like South America and like Africa through their like economic, like
Through economic influence, through foreign aid, buying up property. China's buying up a lot of property in the United States, Chinese. So what you got to pay attention to is which companies. Have you guys ever heard of Huawei?
Yeah, they're trying to build it.
Yeah. So it's like they're AT&T basically. Okay, huge company. Now, what do the board of directors of Huawei, what are their connections to the Chinese Communist government? And so when you look at the connections between these big Chinese companies and the government, okay, you got to pay attention to that. Okay, and we actually, under Trump, we cut our ties with that company. Okay, now under Biden, guys, you got to understand, Biden's a different cat when it comes to China. Okay, you just go back to read his speeches, listen to him, look at his son, his relations with the Chinese. Okay, his son profited big time. So did companies that his son worked for. Biden's not near as tough on China, or tough at all on China. Now, with Taiwan, I will say this, President Biden did have some pretty harsh words for the Chinese. They've been violating the Taiwanese airspace over the last few months, years. Those numbers of violations, like they had 77 violations of Taiwanese airspace in a span of 48 hours 2 weeks ago. Okay, and so Biden did address that. He did say something about it, which is good. Okay, I give him credit. Like I've said before, I don't want Biden to fail, especially in foreign policy. Yeah.
So would you say the Chinese economic system is capitalist?
It's crony capitalism or corrupt capitalism, which we have a lot of that here. Crony capitalism. So like if you have friends in Washington, D.C., and you own a business or a big, large corporation, banks, big banks, they have friends in Washington, D.C. that will pass laws that protect them, help them make bigger profits and so forth.
Right. So,
which is awful. I hate it. Yeah.
So the concern with China spreading and like the world like changing in that way. What is
the human rights concern, the freedom?
Okay.
Yeah. That's the big one. They're enslaving people right now. There's genocide going on. It's dictatorship with some economic freedom. Okay, just like in Vietnam, there's more economic freedom, but you got to be careful what you say about the government because they're listening. Yes, and our government under that $3.5 trillion bill is going to be able to look at any bank account that has $600 or more, any transactions of $600 or more. They're going to report those to the IRS. So your banks are going to be spying on you for the government.
is that like
They're wanting to make sure people are paying their taxes.
right, is that an idea from, the Middle East that like they've been doing?
Oh, I don't know about the Middle East. I don't know what their banking situation, depends on where you are, but, in dictatorial governments, they certainly want to have more information on you and everything you do. Yes, so they can control you. Yes.
I think our GDP is a lot higher than we recognize, mainly because we create a lot of intangible capital,
Yeah.
like software.
Oh, yeah.
Connections,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to measure for an economist.
Yeah, that's why the Chinese try and steal it rather than create it.
Yeah, but we still produce it and own a lot of it, whereas China has a lot more physical capital,
Mhm.
which is way easier to measure,
Mhm.
which is why that's increasing.
I agree.
So I think they're catching, they're moving, they're making a lot of progress, but a lot of like the capital that we're creating right now is hard to measure. So we're actually, I would say we're higher like in GDP than it is represented by the numbers right now.
Yeah, and our population is much smaller. And we do have a larger economy than China, even though our population is 1 billion less. No, I mean, we have capabilities here for sure. It's just what direction are we going to go and what direction they're going. And we have basically built the Chinese economy over the last 20 years by sending our manufacturing over there. We create the technology, they make the products for us. Cheap labor, we buy it cheap. It's a win-win. Yeah, and so their economy's been growing at a much faster clip over the last 25 years than ours has. Now, that has slowed for China, okay, but it was not uncommon to see 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% growth in the Chinese economy, where ours was, from 2008 especially, lagging at recession, which is negative growth, to very slow growth over the last few years. Now, in the Trump years, we saw more growth, and then we're seeing more growth out of the pandemic. The problem we're seeing is labor shortages and government policies that are encouraging labor shortages by people not going back to work. And then you can throw in the vaccine mandate, and then you're going to be laying off people that can't work. They're not allowed to work because they're not vaccinated, which creates more labor shortages. Look at Southwest Airlines this week, okay? And it's going to get worse. And then if you do pass these 3.5, and I was watching something last night about the printing of money, the quantitative easing we've been doing since 2009. We're printing up to $100 billion a month for years. Okay, which this is finally resulting in inflation that we're all living. You guys understand, inflation makes all of us poor. Okay, wages are not keeping pace. Now, wages are coming up for sure, which is good. Because they were stagnant in this country for around 2 decades. Wages were stagnant. Under the Trump administration, you start to see those go up, actually. Then the pandemic hits. And now wages made a big jump just because there's shortages of labor, so they're begging people to work and paying them more, which is good. I mean, it gives power to the working man, which they deserve. The working man deserves some of that, and so, but if you continue this, when you have this type of inflation, which is going to continue, guys, and if they pass these $1 trillion bills, it's scary to me. I'm a little afraid about it. But I think the sanity of some members of Congress is hopefully going to prevent some of that from taking place. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury Secretary they said they were going to start to taper off the quantitative easing, the printing of money. It's time, especially with inflation, to stop printing so much money, okay? Which will have an effect because banks loan this money out to businesses and individuals. You're going to see interest rates come up, making it harder for people to buy homes and stuff like that. But hopefully that will bring inflation under control, okay? So we'll see what happens with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. as far as slowing down. They call it I think it's tamping down on the quantitative easing, slowing it down. Okay, that's the economic language. Okay, okay. Spent a lot of time on that. All right, so all right, let's go to the next slide and see what happens. We did. That was the video. Okay, this is pretty simple here. I mentioned this earlier when we talked about Latin America with Stimson, Hoover's Secretary of State, improving relations, the Stimson Doctrine, improving relations with Latin America. And I did mention this, Roosevelt and the good neighbor policy. Okay. So the first time in American history, we're going to see the President of the United States hop on an airplane, fly to another foreign capital and meet with another foreign head of state like this, okay? Normally, if the President of the United States wanted to meet with the President of Mexico, they'd have to drive, okay? Or if you wanted to go to London or Paris, you'd have to take a ship, yes? So today, our world leaders can meet in person much easier because of air travel. Roosevelt was the first to do that, okay? And I talked about the importance of us being a two-ocean nation, two-ocean hemisphere, and how if everybody in our hemisphere is our friend, then we're safer, okay? We can't be invaded unless it's from across an ocean, which makes us pretty safe. Okay, now we have missiles. So we got to work on that technology. Boeing, Raytheon, they're working on those technologies to protect us. Okay. So that's, this ends up being a very good policy. It started with Stimson, and Roosevelt continues it. This is a political cartoon. Roosevelt goes and meets with the President of Mexico. Very politically incorrect. Here, you would not see something like that in today's newspapers. Like the President of Mexico actually wears a sombrero. Really? You know what I mean? And if the First Lady wears, traditional Mexican clothing like this, when they meet. No. Today, you would call this racist. Okay, and then checking in on Japan again, okay, as we will do from time to time because we know it's going to happen in 1941. Okay, we know about Manchuria again, okay, they withdraw from the League of Nations. And then in 1937, we're going to see continued incursions further and further south. And guys, on the next slide, there's actually going to be an incident where the Japanese are going to attack an American Navy vessel in China. Okay, and the first thing that comes to mind is what in the world is an American Navy ship doing in China in 1937? Guys, just like in Latin America, American business has business in China. And so what the Navy was doing was protecting American ships going up and down the Yangtze River in China. Okay? Which the next slide will show. As soon as people are done writing this down. Ladies, we're going to win tonight?
Yes. Kind of hopefully. I think all officials should take the night off. We should just play because it's their day. Yeah, national official day. Yep. They need their night off. You guys better do that.
I'm gonna tackle at least one person on that.
I don't think wages will do it anymore. There was a dust up probably about 10 years ago, and there was actually a lawsuit that came out of it.
For what?
Wagers had to testify.
What happened?
There was like, some girl got hurt and,
During Holocaust?
yeah,
Yeah,
and she like sued, or her mom sued.
Is
This
that why
other
they're so
person.
strict about like if you tackle, you're getting in big trouble?
I'm surprised they're still happening.
I got told if I tackle someone, I'm getting suspended.
It's school suspension, or out of school suspension.
Yeah, so don't.
Okay, so don't do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's what
No,
I was
I mean,
told.
there is some history there, guys, that resulted in kind of an ugly lawsuit, so, yeah, wagers will not do it anymore because of that. So the slave will probably be one of the refs, or they'll hire some other people. Okay. All right, okay, this is what's known as the Panay Incident in 1937, December of 1937, okay? Now, if you hadn't heard of the Yangtze River, guys, this is the longest river in China. It's the third largest river in the world, as far as length and the amount of water it carries. Okay, so this is a major tributary in China. Okay, as you can see, it extends all the way from Shanghai all the way in to the interior, deep interior of China. Okay, so this is the USS Panay. You can see it has a gun on the front and it's flying the American flag. Now, this is going to be attacked from both the shoreline and from the air. 2 American sailors will be killed, okay, and 46 wounded. The Japanese attack it. Okay, so what's interesting here is the response by the American people, which is, what in the world are we doing in China when they're under attack by the Japanese? This is going to get us drawn into a war. Get us out of there so this doesn't happen again. Okay? Now, if the U.S. Navy vessel is attacked in the Persian Gulf today by Iran, what normally would be our response? Would we strike back? Depends on your president. Reagan? Yeah. You're gonna hit back, okay? But in this case, no, we're gonna, like, many Americans like, let's get out. The Japanese says, oh, sorry, this was an accident, okay? And what are they doing? They're testing us. What's our response gonna be? Okay, they killed 2. They offered $2 million for the families of the dead. Okay, and we took them up on it. Now, our lack of response here could be construed as a form of what? Which you may be writing about on the test. Don't worry, I'll give you plenty of examples, because there's many. Okay. Now, I think the one of the other lectures I gave, I mentioned that the Chinese had finished construction of the world's largest dam on the Yangtze River. Did I mention that to you guys? It's called the Three Gorges Dam. It's right here. Okay, it is over 1.5 miles wide and about 500 feet tall. Okay, it is the largest civil engineering project in modern history. Okay, and it's quite interesting to look at. But one of the things it does is these big dams are hydroelectric. We talked about that, right? So they have 26 turbines on this dam. Okay, each one produces 700 megawatts of electricity, which is equal to a medium-sized nuclear power station. 26 of these. So this is really good for China, and especially if you're kind of like one of these greedy people. Guys, one of the worst polluter in the world is China. Okay, and this is clean energy. So that's kind of a good thing, yes? Okay, But I didn't mention this to you, that's creating a reservoir the size of Indiana. I didn't talk to this guy. Yeah, so when you build a dam, it creates a reservoir, right? This one's the size of Indiana. It's a massive lake, okay? Some people claim that it will actually slow down the rotation of the earth because it's changing the, I mean, that's heavy. That's a lot of water. You understand? You have to look that up.
I think it actually did.
Yeah, fraction of a fraction. Yeah. Now, guys, once this reservoir fully fills up, which it may have by now, I'm not sure if it has, it will flood 38,000 hectares of crops and orchards, submerge 13 cities, 40 towns, 300 villages, and 1,600 factories will all be, it's like Atlantis, underwater, okay? As a result, 1.2 million people had to be relocated, which is the largest resettlement project in history for a civil engineering project. Perhaps of even greater loss than the land are the 100 plus historical sites that some date back to 10,000 BC that will be submerged or are submerged. However, the dam will help control the floods that had displaced 38 million people. So, and destroyed a lot of houses and crops and so forth, okay? But what it's going to allow is for ship locks, and it's going to allow ships to come all the way down in here into larger ships in the Chongqing, which serves a population of about 380 million people. So it's going to open up markets there, okay? Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Now, there are some negative sides to this. Landslides, because of the erosion in the reservoir, could be a thing. Sedimentation, the reservoir will trap about 75% of sediments, causing dam and ship lock problems. Water loss. When you create a reservoir that big, that lake, size of Indiana, a lot of that is going to evaporate. Okay, so that hurts people downstream. Less water, waterborne disease, and then there's safety issues. If this something were to happen to this dam. Now, if we ever go to war with China, I don't know about all that. Again, for the greener amongst you guys, what's interesting about this is, I mean, this Three Gorges area in here is, I mean, it's just wild, it's just a lot. People, live in the wilderness around these mountains and so forth. In the years leading up to the building of this dam, 40 new wild animal species had been discovered. So like, this is like the Amazon type thing, okay? Including 12 mammal species were discovered, 21 bird species were discovered, 6 reptiles and 5 amphibians that we didn't even know existed before. And now that's all going to be covered. There's also 4 species under state protection, like endangered species, the golden monkey, clouded leopard, spotted leopard, and the golden eagle are all, that's their habitat, okay? This may cause some of them to, be endangered or extinct, okay? So, I mean, there's some good with this progress for China, and there's some bad with it as well.
Did it happen? They made the dam, right?
Yeah. It's been completed. I've got a little video.
What about
Yeah.
like, can they, it's not reversible at this point.
No, you can't.
Can't
No.
build it out.
No.
Oh, yeah.
No.
You can pump it all back out. That for the next 100 years.
I mean, sure you could, there's an issue.
Okay. Here's a picture of the dam today. Okay. And then I have a little video.
Looks a lot smaller than.
Yeah, if I was just blowing that wall right there.
Can we build it down if there's a-
How big of a problem would it actually be? If the dam were to be.
Oh, if it broke open, it'd be
Wasn't there a scare
humanitarian
a few
disaster.
years ago, like that there was cracks in the dam?
Are there cracks in it already? Scary. I mean, what if you have an earthquake?
Wait.
All right. This is a little on the cheesy side, okay, but it's the best short video I could find.
The Three Gorges Dam is the world's largest hydroelectricity project, the world's largest hydropower station, and a massive water control project that has made a huge difference to navigation in the region.
Where I'm sitting right now is as high as the highest point of the Three Gorges Dam, 185 meters. The water in this basin behind me reaches a height of 175 meters. And even though we can't see a lot of it today, I'll describe to you guys how vast and how wide this dam actually is. From this point to the other point of the upstream is 2,309 meters wide. This water and the water downstream has a difference of 100 meters. Can you imagine the amount of water that high, even as high as the Statue of Liberty in New York, what kind of ability it has to control floodings and generate power? It's no wonder that this enormous construction behind me earns its title of biggest standalone architectural construction in the world.
Like a giant door, the Three Gorges Dam locks the exit of the Three Gorges of the Yangtze River. Rapidly running water is retained in an enormous reservoir, 600 kilometers in length and 175 meters above the river. Tourists from every country of the world come to see the Grand Three Gorges Dam.
Is this your first time to visit the Three Gorges? Okay, what are your feelings? What are your sympathy towards this place?
Well, I know where you're going.
No, I have totally no intention.
No, I think it's a tremendous project, and I thought they needed to do it. Because they have well, you got all the flooding issues, and you have a tremendous need for power in China. It's a huge country, and I think we shouldn't judge what anybody else does in their own country.
Are you an engineer? Are you from a professional point of view interested in this place? Hello? Are you an engineer? You were before. What's next for you professionally? Are you still doing things with engineering? Retired. Okay.
3 sections of the Three Gorges Dam are open to tourists, but you need to walk on top of the dam to see how huge it really is.
我现在获得了特批，我一会儿可以去一个普通的游客没法去的地方。那个地方是哪儿呢？是大坝的坝里。
He speaks Mandarin.
The Three Gorges Dam is obviously not only used to generate electricity, it's also used to control the river and to control it from flooding. Now here are 23 floodgates, which are all massive in size. And you must be wondering how big the water basin on the upper end of the dam might be. It houses an amount of 20 million cubic meters, which is obviously an incredible amount. It's hard to imagine.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, he picked a bad day to do it, yeah. Okay. All right, so now we move into talking a little bit about this isolationism and neutrality, okay? And, you know, one thing we got to keep in mind here, guys, okay, is you have the geopolitical issues, which are obviously about to explode. But you have to understand that Roosevelt is a politician as well. So you've got to remember that there's politics involved here, okay? So when you look at the American people at this point in time, they are strongly opposed to any involvement in any conflict in Europe or Asia or anywhere. Okay? So Roosevelt, you know, he knows that. And so what we see a lot of times are words, but no actions. Okay? So when you look at this, FDR warned that the whole world would be engulfed in war if this aggression continued. Yep, he's right. That's going to happen. Okay? But he calls for a quarantine of aggressor nations. Now, we today know and understand quarantine better than ever before. And we know that means you isolate a person or a nation in this case, which means you cut off trade with them. You don't do business with them. You don't have relations with them. Okay, are we going to do that? No. Okay, we're going to continue to trade with Japan, okay, throughout the 1930s. Okay, we're going to continue to do business with Germany throughout the 1930s. Okay, and so these are just words, right? And then when you look at the American people, we fall into different camps here. Okay, some became pacifists, said, "Hey, no war for any reason whatsoever." Okay, and then most Americans fall into this category of isolationists. Okay, that hey, let's mind our own business, not get involved. And then you guys remember we talked about all the immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. So you have a lot of people, like probably some of your kinfolk, okay, that didn't really like the idea of going to war with what was recently their home country. Italian Americans wanting to go to war with Italy. You know what I mean? Now we had a lot of German Americans that were fighting in World War I against Germany, which is a strange thing, okay, but it was a thing. And those Germans certainly faced discrimination in this country. And then you had a few that said, hey, why don't we just become Nazis? So you have the American Nazi Party, okay? This picture here is at American Nazi Party rally. You've got the American flag, George Washington, and the swastika flag. Guys, in 1939, there was a rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City where 20,000 people showed up for the American Nazi Party rally. That was a real thing. And it wasn't just in the United States, guys. One thing I want to implore to you guys is this is important as Hitler begins to seek expansion and conquer other countries. The Germans will employ something called the fifth column. Now, guys, this goes back to Roman history. And we know the Romans like to expand, yes? Yeah. Boy, did they expand. But to make it easier for them to conquer other peoples, they use this, the fifth column, which would send people in to those places, recruit people in those places to support the Romans. This is what the Nazis will do. There are stooges in every country that will form Nazi parties in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in France, in Britain. All of these nations had Nazi parties. And what the fifth column does is it builds up support for the Nazis. They did this in Austria very well, very effectively. Okay? And the other thing they do is cause instability. Okay, if they can cause problems within that country, an unstable government, is easier to take over than a stable government. Yes? So we're talking about, marches, rallies, riots, fights, causing disruption. Okay, this is what the fifth column will do. Okay, and it was very effective. as I will come back to that. As I said, like in places like Austria. Now, in the United States, you also had this group called America's First, or America First, okay? Now, you may have heard a lot of that during the Trump administration too, yes? America First. Now, this is a little different. What Trump was saying is a little different. But this is about, hey, let's not worry about what's happening to France. Let's not worry about what's happening to Britain or Poland, okay? Let's worry about ourselves. So this is actually from about 1939, 1940, okay? And you've got Lindbergh on the horse, a couple of senators, Wheeler and Nye. It says Roosevelt is a warmonger. Nothing can crush Hitler but a negotiated peace. Hitler don't want to fight us. We haven't a thing to fight with. We can't defeat the Nazis, okay? This is Britain's war, not ours, okay? So you had these elements within American society, all right? But where most of Americans bring you back to this, okay? Back to isolationism. What time do we get out? Not 25? Dang. Okay. Okay. All right, if you guys want to write this down, and then I'll start with it. Those of you guys that are writing down, I'll start with it tomorrow. And then actually found another video that's not in my notes that I'll throw in there that's pretty good about this. It's only 2 minutes, but it's a little scary actually. I pulled it up and watched it. It was like, ooh, wow. Good?